The senator from North Carolina.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join together to prevent an irresponsible government shutdown. The American people did not elect us to shut down the government. Democrats and Republicans in both the House and the Senate must tighten the federal government's belt, just like Americans are doing every day at their kitchen tables. As we all know, our escalating national debt is our country's most pressing problem. Our country's current fiscal course is simply unsustainable. In just the last 10 years, our federal debt has risen from roughly a third of our gross domestic product to nearly two-thirds of GDP in 2010. Based on the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates, without proactive action by Congress, that percentage will continue to increase over the next 10 years, with public debt expected to reach 90% of GDP in 2020. Meanwhile, nearly half of our current debt is owned by China and other foreign creditors. It is time for Congress to work together to chart a new bipartisan course that puts our fiscal house in order. Mr. President, before coming to the U.S. Senate, I served for 10 years as a state senator in the North Carolina General Assembly. I served as co-chair of the Budget Committee, and I know that crafting a budget is never easy. There are always difficult choices, and both sides have to make sacrifices. And as a budget co-chair, I worked for 5 consecutive years to ensure that North Carolina's budget was balanced, that we still made critical investments in our communities while eliminating unnecessary spending. It takes cooperation across party lines to meet fiscal challenges and to ensure government is both leaner and more effective. We need bipartisan cooperation this week to prevent a federal government shutdown, which is an irresponsible outcome. Keeping the government functioning for the American people is Congress's core responsibility. We must come together to cut spending and support critical priorities, such as education, that strengthen our economy and support economic development in North Carolina communities and in communities across America. And while I believe we all share the common goal of reducing our nation's deficit, we should remember that our most troubling economic challenges cannot be solved in 1 year alone. That's why I am concerned by some of the cuts passed by the House. The House proposal would result in the loss of some 21,000 North Carolina jobs and decimate important education priorities like Head Start and investments in historically black colleges and universities. Nearly 1 in 5 African Americans who earn an undergraduate degree has a diploma from a historically black college or university. North Carolina has 10 four-year HBCUs, more than any other state in the country. And funding through the Department of Education allows these institutions to strengthen programs and provide critical services for students who are often among the first in their families to attend college. And the House would cut funding to HBCUs by nearly a quarter, $85 million below last year's level, a cut that would have a disastrous impact on these institutions and their students, while not even scratching the surface of our current deficit. In addition, by insisting on dozens of divisive policy riders, House Republicans are disrupting our ability to chart a pragmatic and responsible fiscal course for the country. We cannot take our eye off the ball. The President's Bipartisan Fiscal Commission, co-chaired by North Carolina's own Erskine Bowles and former Senator Alan Simpson, made important progress in beginning to diagnose and attack the root causes of our nation's fiscal crisis. The bipartisan work of the Fiscal Commission is evidence that common ground is possible. Reducing spending will absolutely be a part of any comprehensive solution, but we must begin to have a broader discussion to create meaningful deficit reduction. And for that reason, I am supporting Senate 211, the Biennial Budgeting and Appropriations Act, which was introduced by my colleagues, Senator Isaacson and Senator Shaheen. This bill would take the Washington-as-usual politics out of the budgeting process. The bill changes the budget process from the current annual spending debate to a two-year deliberative process that allows us to work together on common-sense cuts coupled with sensible investments, similar to what is done in North Carolina, which balances its budget every year. And right now, Congress rarely passes the 12 government funding bills by the end of the fiscal year. And this year, we've been operating on short-term fix after short-term fix. A biennial budget process is part of the long-term solution we need to remove partisanship from the budget. The status quo is unacceptable. Mr. President, I hope that we can continue to work across party lines this week and moving forward on a bipartisan, comprehensive plan for the nation's budget that tackles head-on our mounting debt. Mr. President, I ask that we have a quorum call.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had the chance to sit in the chair this evening just before you came and listen to people on both sides of the aisle talk a little bit about our debt and our deficit situation, the pending shutdown of the federal government. Shudder to think that we might actually do that, but it may happen. And I thought I might keep my senior senator a little bit of company. The hour is late and the floor is empty, to have the chance to talk a little bit about how we see this from Colorado. Like you, I've had the chance to travel one of the most beautiful states in the country. The last 2 years, 40,000 miles across the state of Colorado, having town hall meetings in red parts of the state and in blue parts of the state. And believe it or not, and I know you would believe it, because you're talking to the same people I'm talking to, and maybe more important than that, listening to the same people that I'm listening to, I think a fairly substantial consensus emerged out of those meetings. By the way, not a single one of those town hall meetings, not one in 2 years, no matter what part of the state I was in, would any self-respecting cable television producer want to put on cable TV at night? Because we don't scream at each other in Colorado. We have our differences. We have our disagreements. We have a lot of shared values, though, whether we're Democrats or Republicans, Tea Party members, independents. We're about a third Republican, a third Democratic, a third independent. And that consensus that emerged from these meetings on our debt and our deficit was straightforward. Three-part test for people in Colorado. The first was they want us to come up with a comprehensive solution that materially addresses the fiscal challenges this country faces. They don't want a bunch of gimmicks. They don't want a bunch of talking points. And they don't want people in this chamber or the chamber on the other side of the Capitol spending their time scoring political points at the expense of the American people. So the question they're going to ask first when you and I go back there, I think, is, did you get to a comprehensive solution? Not, by the way, did you fix it overnight? Because they know it can't be fixed overnight. But can we be secure in the idea that we're not going to leave our kids and our grandkids what is today $15 trillion of debt and a $1.5 trillion budget deficit? Because all things being equal, we'd like to allow our kids and our grandkids to not have their choices constrained by our inability to get anything done here in Washington. So that's the first test for people in Colorado. The second test is they want to know that any solution that we come up with is one where we're all in it together, that everybody in America has the chance to make a contribution to solving this fiscal nightmare that we face. They're not interested in pitting one group of people against another group of people. In fact, that makes them feel suspicious about what we're doing. They want to know that we're all in it together, which brings me to the third common sense Colorado point of view on this issue, which is they would like this. In fact, they'll insist that the solution be a bipartisan solution because they don't have confidence in one party's ideas on this question. That's a lucky thing because we have a Republican-controlled House and we have a Democratic-controlled Senate, and the President's a Democrat. We can't solve this problem in these times without it being a bipartisan solution. That's it. If I can go home and say we materially addressed the problem, we're all in it together, and it was a bipartisan solution, I think people would say, you guys have finally done something. We feel patriotic, like we've done something useful for our kids. Now, as the presiding officer knows, there are people all over our state, local government officials that are Republicans and Democrats that are making really tough decisions about their budgets. And I have an incredible amount of sympathy for what they're dealing with. I had the great fortune earlier in my career to serve as the Chief of Staff for our now Governor, John Hickenlooper, when he was Mayor of Denver. When John went into that office and I went in as his Chief of Staff, we faced a huge budget deficit by Denver's standards. And we had to cut 11% of our expenditures. And we met with people living all throughout the city and county of Denver. We sought their advice. We established a set of priorities. We passed it through a city council. And you know what? Denver lived to fight another day. Our economy grew, and things were pretty good there for a while until this current recession. When I became superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, as the President knows, a district that year after year after year, for almost a decade, maybe even longer than that, was the poster child for cutting every single year. Every year people in other school districts would say, thank God we're not the Denver Public Schools. Every year the Denver Public Schools would lose teachers to other districts who could afford to pay them more. And every year we cut and we cut and we cut as a district. When I became superintendent, one of the cases I made to the school board was we have profound structural problems in our budget. And instead of approaching the budget in a way that diminishes the academic environment for kids, what we ought to be figuring out how to do is establish a set of priorities and build a public case to deal with the structural problems that existed in our budget. And because of the good work of the school board, I should say, the courageous work of the school board, we were able to get that done. We were able to close schools for the first time in a long time. That's hard work. Those meetings were harder than healthcare town hall meetings, I can tell you that. We were able to deal with the pension liability that our district had. And we were able year after year to invest more money, not less, in our schools and in our classrooms. And now, under the current leadership there, who I think are doing an exceptional job, the district no longer is the poster child for anything except fighting hard on behalf of the children in the Denver Public Schools. Now, here's the thing that drives me crazy about what's going on in the conversation we're having now about this shutdown. There is no way that any superintendent of schools in Colorado or any school board in Colorado or any city council or any mayor from the biggest city to the smallest town would show up to work and say, we might close the government 2 weeks from now. It's an option for us that we will not pick up your trash 2 weeks from now. Or plow the streets. We still get snow in Colorado at this time of year. Or plow the streets 2 weeks from now. We're going to close down. It wouldn't occur to anybody working in a local government in our state to say that they were going to do that. You know why? Because people would become unglued, unhinged. They'd say, we hired you to do a job, work it out. We're doing our jobs, or we're looking for jobs. We don't have time to solve these problems. You were hired to do this job. Work it out. Come to an agreement. Don't come home and tell us you're shutting the government down, that you're not going to pick up the trash, that you're not going to plow the snow, that you're not going to educate our kids. The idea that as a I got in trouble when I closed school for snow once. Turned out to be a great decision because it was one of the worst blizzards we ever had, but it could have gone the other way. Because people rely on us to do the work that we're supposed to do. They have plans. And the idea that at a time when we are fighting wars all across this globe, at a time when there are governments and countries that are trying to seek an economic advantage over the United States of America in a global economy that has shrunk the way ours has shrunk, that we would say to ourselves, we're going to pause. We can't even keep the government open in this democracy. I think would reflect terribly not on the American people and not on our democracy, but on this institution of government. There's a reason why we are in the basement as an institution in terms of polling. Why should people have confidence in an institution that can't actually even keep running in the short term? And I think it's important, based on the conversation I've heard tonight here on both sides of the aisle, for the American people to understand that this debate about this government shutdown is not a debate about our deficit and our debt. Not really. It's been about scoring political points. And what I want to say is this, just as one member of this body, I hope and I would encourage the leadership of both sides of the aisle here, the leadership in the House, our president, to find a way to work it out and to make sure that we keep this government open. I think closing it sends entirely the wrong message, and I know that there are people on both sides of the aisle here that believe that. And I hope people do absolutely everything they can do between now and the end of this week to make sure that we send a message that we are not as dysfunctional as we appear to be. Because I think this place ought to meet the standard that people at the local level of government are held to in our state. No business would say, I don't know, maybe we'll close for 2 weeks or close for a month. They're figuring out how to invest and grow even in this challenging economy. We should be doing the same. Now, Mr. President, you and I were in a meeting this morning. We started the day at 8 o'clock in the morning with 33 senators, Republicans and Democrats, who came together to hear some very thoughtful observations about how important it is that we come to a comprehensive solution to deal with our deficit and to deal with our debt. Heard an important presentation about how there's no silver bullet here. There's no easy way to solve any of this. But perhaps the least painful way to think about it is with the most comprehensive plan, which, by the way, is the intuition of people in Colorado, as I said earlier today. It gave me great confidence that there were a bunch of Republicans and a bunch of Democrats in a room listening to this message and willing, I think, to work together in a bipartisan way. I was very fortunate to have drafted a letter that Mike Johans co-signed with me from Nebraska, a Republican, that called on the President to engage after this period that we're having a discussion about right now with closing the government or keeping it open or whatever it is we're going to do, asking the President to engage in a conversation that is comprehensive, that says, you know what, we know this is going to involve cuts to discretionary spending, both domestic and military. We know this is going to involve reform of our entitlements. We know that it's going to involve reform of our tax code as well. Senator Coates from Indiana was out here today with a lot of common sense around how our tax code doesn't drive innovation, and competition, and growth, and he's right about that. There's a lot of work to be done here, and I have every confidence that it can happen. That letter that we wrote turned out to have 64 signatures on it. 64 people signed that letter. That's more than the 60 that are required to pass a piece of legislation. That's a majority of the Democrats in the Senate. It's a majority of the Republicans in the Senate. And I know it's just a letter, but it reflects what I believe to be true about what people in this body believe, which is that we can solve this issue. We can solve this problem, but we're only going to be able to do it if we do it together. And we're only going to be able to do it if we get to a place where we're no longer as concerned about winning political points as we are about actually addressing the problem. And I have confidence we can do it. Someone said to me today, they said, you seem to be a guy that feels like the Senate is really dysfunctional. You got a reputation for believing that the Senate is dysfunctional, and I'll confess, there are days when I wonder. And there are days when I feel like it is dysfunctional. But on this set of issues, I think the Senate can shine. On this set of issues, I think this is the place where leadership really can take hold and where we can create a bipartisan solution to this. And the people of Colorado, and I think the American people, expect us to do everything we can to get this done. So there are two conversations going on simultaneously, and I thought it was just important to point out that one is about the very, very short-term issue of what we're going to do with this continuing budget. By the way, no one in Colorado would stand for the idea that you don't pass a budget in the year that you're in, but that's another Washington cultural artifact that we ought to get rid of. But that's distinct from the comprehensive discussion we need to have around here on our deficit and our debt. And, you know, at the end of the two-year discussion that I was having and the beginning of a new discussion now with Colorado, it became pretty straightforward what people want, not just on the debt and deficit, but other things that they're concerned about, that we ought to be turning our attention to here. Instead of having this back and forth about whether we're going to keep the government open, it ought to be assumed that we're going to keep the government open. We just came off the first decade in the country's history, in our history, when median family income fell. It was lower at the end of the decade than it was at the beginning of the decade. It's never been true before in the United States. For families in Colorado, that means that they're actually earning less at the end of the decade than they were at the beginning. But their cost of higher education has gone up by more than 40%. Their cost of health care has gone up by more than 100% over that period of time. We've created no net new jobs in the United States or in Colorado since 1998. People would like to see that turned around. People would like to see us working together on a tax code that drives innovation, to make sure that we don't have regulations that unnecessarily stifle economic growth. They'd like to see that. They'd like us to break our reliance on foreign oil from the Persian Gulf. Even before what's happened in the Middle East and in Libya occurred in the last month or so, even before that, people were saying to me, Michael, we don't think it makes much sense for us to be buying oil from the Persian Gulf. We don't understand why we have an energy policy that requires us to ship billions of dollars a week to the Persian Gulf to buy oil when we could be investing that money developing our energy resources here in the United States. That's work we could be doing together in a bipartisan way. And as the President knows, I have a passion for public education. as do the people that are living in Colorado, and they know we're not getting the job done there either. We have before us the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, but we somehow can't move that forward. And teachers and kids and principals and moms and dads all over our state are expecting us to get that work done. We have to find a way to educate our kids for the 21st century economy that hopefully we will build for them. And we're not getting the job done. As I said on the floor the other day, if you look at this question from the perspective of poor children living in our home state of Colorado or all across the United States of America, and if you think about this room that we're in right now and the fact that there are 100 desks that don't belong, I guess, to 100 senators because they belong to the American people, but where 100 senators sit and work, if these desks reflected the odds of poor children living in our country succeeding educationally, things would look pretty grim in here. 42 out of the 100 chairs in this place would be occupied by a child living in poverty. 42. By the time our children in poverty got to the 8th grade, only 16 kids would be reading at grade level. That's 4 and 4. That's about 16 desks. The entire rest of this Senate chamber would be full of children that couldn't read at grade level in the 8th grade today, in the 21st century, in the United States of America. By the time our poor children would be graduating from college, only 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 would be graduating from college. These 2 rows in that chair right there. The entire rest of this chamber would have no college degree. In a global economy that's requiring that as a pathway to the middle class, to meaningful participation in the democracy, to meaningful participation in this global economy, 91 people in this place would be shut out because they were born into a zip code that's poor. Those odds look pretty long to the kids that are living in those neighborhoods. I've spent a lot of time with our kids in those neighborhoods, not just in Colorado, but all across the United States of America. They think we've already made a promise to them, that they live in a land of opportunity that is going to reward their hard work, and that if they stick with it, they're going to end up with a college degree. That's what they believe. We may have made that promise, but we certainly haven't followed through on that commitment. And why should that matter to us? Some people look at that and say, well, someone else's problem. I don't need to worry about it. McKinsey has done a study that shows us that the effect of those outcomes is to create a permanent recession on the United States. The effect of that dropout rate creates a permanent recession on the United States that actually is about the same as the recession that we just went through. Which means that if you are concerned with economic growth in the United States, you need to concern yourself with the educational outcomes that our kids in poverty are facing. If you're concerned with income inequality in the United States, you need to be concerned with the outcomes that I just described. You know, last year, the top 1% of income earners in this country earned 23% of the income, almost a quarter of the income. The last time that was true was 1928. Now, that doesn't lead me to conclude that somehow we should redistribute it, but it does lead me to conclude that we ought to fix our education system so that more people have the chance to put themselves and their families into the middle class. We can't afford in this country to repeat the decade that we just went through. We can't afford to have an economy where median income is falling. We can't afford to have an economy that's not creating jobs. We can't afford to carry a debt and deficit burden that at some point the capital markets are going to look at and say, we're not financing you anymore. And we can't afford to fail to educate children in this country just because they're poor. I also think we can't afford to have an energy policy that commits us to a dependence on oil in the Persian Gulf. I think the people in Colorado and across this country are expecting us to do our jobs just as they are doing their job. And so I say again, I hope the leadership of both parties, working in good faith, can keep this government open. And I hope that we can move on to a broader and more comprehensive conversation around debt, around deficit, around our economy, and around the education of our kids. I see that the majority leader has arrived, and I will yield the floor. Mr. President, I appreciate your attention.
Mr. President,
The majority leader is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent that 11 a.m. Wednesday, April 6th, the Senate resume consideration of S-493 and the pending amendments be set aside and Senator Reid or designee be recognized to call the following amendments: Baucus 236, Stabenow 277, Rockefeller 215, Coburn 217, Coburn 223, Coburn 273, Inouye 286. That the pending Sanders Amendment 207 be modified with the changes at the desk. That the Senate then proceed to a period of debate only until 4 p.m. with the time equally divided between the two leaders or the designees. Prior to votes in relation to the following amendments in the order listed below: Baucus 236, Stabenow 277, Rockefeller 215, McConnell 183, Coburn 223, Inouye 286, Coburn 273. That there be no amendments in order to the amendments prior to the votes, the amendments not be divisible. The motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table. There be 2 minutes equally divided in between the votes. All after the first vote be 10 minutes in duration, and the amendments be subject to a 60-vote threshold for adoption. That upon the disposition of the Coburn Amendment 273, Amendment number 184 and 217 offered by Senator Coburn be agreed to, that no amendments be in order to the Coburn Amendments number 184 and 217 prior to their adoption, and all of the above occurring with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I appreciate everyone's patience in regard to getting this consent agreement. None of these votes are going to be easy, but they're votes that are necessary. Mr. President, I would also say in relation to the statement made by my friend from Colorado, trying to figure out who is the senior senator between the presiding officer and the junior senator from Colorado, the nice statement that he made. And we're doing our very best to work something out on the CR that will fund the government to the end of this fiscal year. As has been reported in the press, I had a meeting with the Speaker tonight at 4 o'clock. We're still negotiating in good faith. We're not that far apart. And hopefully we can work something out. It's something we should be able to do, and certainly we're trying. As we speak, our people are working on this. So I want everyone to know that the government's not going to be shut down yet. There's still air in the tire. We still have some miles to travel, but I hope there's enough air in it to get us to where we need to go. I ask unanimous consent the Health Committee be discharged from further consideration S-129 and the Senate proceed to its consideration.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 129, honoring the 29 coal miners who perished in the explosion at the Upper Big Branch mine in Montcalm, West Virginia on April 5, 2010, and so forth.
Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I further ask that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion reconsider be laid on the table, there be no intervening action or debate, and any statements relating to this matter be placed in the record at the appropriate place as if given.
Without objection,
Would note the absence of quorum.
clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate now proceed to the consideration of Senate Resolution 130, which was submitted earlier today.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 130 designating April 5, 2011 as Gold Star Wives Day.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Senate Resolution 131 submitted earlier today.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 131 designating April 2011 as Tsunami Awareness Month.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, and any statements relating to the matter be placed in the record as if read.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I understand that H.R. 1255 has been received from the House and is at the desk.
The clerk will read the bill for the first time.
H.R. 1255, an act to prevent a shutdown of the government of the United States and for other purposes.
I would ask for its second reading and object to my own request.
Objection is heard. The Senate will have its second reading on the next legislative day.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it recess until 9:30 a.m. on Wednesday, April 6th, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day. The Senate proceed to a period of morning business until 11 a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time until 10:40 a.m. equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half, and that at 10:40 a.m. Senator Ayotte be recognized to deliver her maiden speech to the Senate, and that following morning business, the Senate resume consideration of S-493, the Small Business Jobs Bill, as provided for under the previous order.